Federal Drive is presented by GEHA, Government Employees Health Association, proudly providing health and dental benefits to federal employees and their families. Visit GEHA.com.
The Agriculture Department, like all large departments, has large and varied software needs. It also develops applications for other agencies as a sort of contractor. USDA has adopted a development methodology known as low-code, no-code. For what that's all about, at last week's Executive Leadership Conference of the ACT-IAC Group, I caught up with the USDA's Jerry Hinchin, Federal Project Lead for Software as a Service software development. There's a lot of ways to develop software. You have, at least for now, glommed onto the low-code, no-code technology. Fundamentally, why?
Well, you think about it from an aspect of how do you develop quickly to get away from these long-term 3 to 5 year IT projects that halfway through that implementation, your requirements change, or in the case of AI, you have a disruptive technology. No-code, low-code, it allows you to quickly change gears without having to go back and recode everything of all that custom coding.
Low code, no code is really kind of misnamed, isn't it? It's no coding, low coding, because code is produced, right?
Code is produced, correct. It's a better way to say it would be configuration over coding.
And who does the configuration? I mean, the traditional software developers don't touch it, or do they?
No, they do. 100% software developers. In the case of my work at Rural Development and other work that I've done, it is those software developments, whether they're Fed staff, whether they're contractors, they're all developers. They have to be able to understand how that configuration will affect the function of that feature functionality that I'm trying to implement.
And when working with low code, no code, and we'll get to the difference between the two, are you able to do the testing and examination such that, say, if you deploy a module, that it will in fact work with what's already in place, that kind of thing?
Oh, absolutely, 100%. With low code, no code, it's no different than your standard traditional coding. You still have the ability to scan the code. You still have the ability to review the code. You still have you lose nothing. It's just a different way to look at how we implement IT solutions.
But there must be some advantages then. Otherwise, just do the traditional coding.
Sure. There's a lot of advantages. You heard me talk earlier today about the modularity of how we're trying to get to that modularity and the sharing and reuse. That's a huge advantage of low-code, no-code, or clicks-over configuration. It's being able to quickly configure versus writing all that custom code that, it would be great if I wrote every single piece of code. But in a lot of cases, people retire, especially in the federal government. We have a graying workforce. And with low-code, no-code, there's very little tribal knowledge that needs to be passed from one developer to the next. You're relying on the configuration of the platform you're developing on.
And by the way, what's the difference between low code and no code?
So low code is, they're similar, but I'll tell you about what the differences are. No code is you're simply doing configurations for the entire platform, the entire application. Low code is, for the most part, it's similar to no code, but you do still need to customize. Maybe there's a report, a custom report you want to generate, and you need to be able to do the functions in a better way that's, you're not going to get out of the configuration. So there is a balance, again, depending on the requirements.
And what about the output? That is to say, there's a bunch of no-code, low-code vendors out there. Mm-hmm. Do they all produce the same code? I mean, is it Java? Is it COBOL? Is it C++, C#? I mean, what comes out of it?
So it's, again, dependent on your platform. With a particular vendor, you're going to have Apex code. Apex, Java, they're not identical, but they're very similar. So if you understand, a lot of developers in the industry today understand that Java code. That's what they've used for years. That's what people have used for years. Apex code is the same thing. There's enough commonality that you're able to go back and forth and understand what that code is doing, unlike the COBOL programs we heard talk about today, where those people that designed that and programmed in that, they're no longer around.
Sure, and they also had a whole different methodology. You coded right to a set of instructions right there on the hardware.
Right.
Very different nowadays. We are speaking with Jerry Hinchin. He is the Federal Project Lead, Software as a Service, Software Development Lead for the Department of Agriculture. You mentioned governance. issues with low code, no code. What are they, and why are they unique to low code, no code?
Well, they're not unique. It's more of a larger problem of governance within the federal government. But really, it's when we talk governance in the low code, no code environment, it's about that, best practices. There's each of the platforms have a best practice that, this is a way to implement this feature functionality capability that you're trying to get with. Governance is important. There's coding standards that are to be implemented. There's best practices and ways to, do things. Governance is very important, whether you're no code, low code, or whether you're 100% custom coding.
And let's talk about some of the things you're doing in USDA in this manner with low code, no code. What are some of the top line projects you're pursuing?
So currently I'm working on a project with FEMA where FEMA's hired USDA to build and manage and run the infrastructure for their Hermit's Peak, Calf Canyon claims loss program. So we're doing that it's primarily no code, low code. There is some custom coding in that. In the past with rural development, it was the Congressional Announcement Management System where the total amount of code that was in that program was less than 170 lines of code. Everything else was no code.
Wow. And if you are modernizing an application or adding to an existing enterprise application, how do you know, or what's the methodology for ensuring that the output of the low code, no code embodies all of the business rules that really relate to the program rules ultimately?
Great question. But it really boils down to what are my requirements, Tom? Tell me what your requirements are, and I can tell you what the best technical solution is that's going to fit those requirements.
And do you find that having your own people use these tools gets you closer sooner than, say, the integrators or external people because of understanding of the government context?
It does, and not to say there's a time and place for solution integrators, but there's also a time and place where government needs to have expertise in that field of not just low code, no code, but any kind of IT application development, software development, where those government experts need to have the wherewithal to, when a solution integrator's proposing a potential solution to implement to solve a business problem, that we really need that expertise to say, yes, this is a good approach. Yes, this matches whether it's USDA or other federal agency best practices, whether this follows the platform best practices. It's very vital.
And a final question. Intellectual property of the output of low code, no code. Is that the government? And if you develop something and say another third agency could use that 175 lines of code, it's theirs to use?
Absolutely. Again, it depends on how the contract is written. But in the case of the work of sharing the code with FDIC, it was in when FDIC initially wrote that contract for that software to be developed. It was written into the contract that they could share it with other agencies. And, and this also plays right into data rights. Inherently, the government has data rights with any, whether it's a solution integrator developed code, whether it's no code, low code, the government owns the data rights.
Jerry Hinchin, Federal Project Lead for Software as a Service Software Development at the Agriculture Department. We spoke at the ACT-IAC Executive Leadership Conference last week in Hershey, Pennsylvania. We'll post this interview at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Subscribe to the Federal Drive wherever you get your podcasts.
Behind the delivery trucks that keep your life stocked, thousands of employees at BP go to work every day. People bringing a new offshore production platform online. People making our refineries capable of more, like making renewable diesel from agricultural waste. People trading and shipping fuels to our customers. And people helping truckers fill up and get maintenance at our convenient locations. They're part of the more than 300